Okay. We are live on YouTube. Whoops.
Wait for that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Now we'll call a meeting to order and approval of the previous minutes. If there's no additions or corrections, motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Number 3.
You're good, Jeannie.
Number 3, we have a final pilot resolution for 6314 Dean Parkway and Peak Fabrications. We had our public meeting last week on November 10th in the town of Ontario. We did not receive any emails or letters in regards to this public hearing, and we did not have any public at the event, so there were no comments. But we do have a representative, Matt, who's going to be talking about the project and the expansion.
Okay. So it's a 3,200 square foot building addition and modernization of the facility, on Dean Parkway. The main purpose is to add capacity for manufacturing. The 3,200 square feet will be split of office and manufacturing space, pulling the office out of the original building and making that all manufacturing space.
Tell us a little bit about the business.
Peak Fabrications is a sheet metal fabrication company, so they offer welding, forming, really contract work. Customer base is mostly local, United States and within the Finger Lakes region.
Who's your biggest customer?
An electric vehicle charging station company. And that's recent.
Is there a job number associated?
We've committed to 3 over the 3 years, which is conservative. Just in the climate right now, it's tough to solidify that number, but we believe that at least 1 a year is what we plan on.
Do you already have a staff?
Yep, we have 16 people.
16?
Yep, very nice.
This is an acquisition of a previously occupied building. Go ahead.
Yep, completely, we actually, Avalanche, the company itself, was, an existing company that we had acquired a few years ago, and then along with that, last year, we closed down the building in the land.
And who's we?
OptiPro is the sister company to, Peak Fabrications.
Everyone familiar with OptiPro, the optics or machine manufacturing?
So OptiPro is a machine manufacturer for grinding, polishing, and measuring precision optics, as well as a distributor for machine tools and the Mastercam software. And they work a lot with the government programs, DOE, DOD, and NASA on SBIR grants and further research. So at Peak Fabrications, we do make a lot of the components for the machines that they build there, just right down the road.
Other questions or comments?
Are you going to be doing powder coating and that sort of thing too?
We're exploring it. We have not committed. We have room for it. With how powder coating has been going on, everyone being reshoring manufacturing, it would be beneficial, assuming that we can do it in a way that's environmentally friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Comment? What's your pleasure?
I make a motion, we approve as submitted.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. You?
Thank you.
Deb, you want to just go back to the agenda? Or?
The next on the agenda is a resolution authorizing the resubmission or a revised submission of the Paris report.
Yes.
So for the Paris report, when I was inputting the information onto our, Paris, the ABO website, I noticed some discrepancies with the last year of 2020. So I needed to make those changes, and they do need to be approved by the board. The areas I made some changes to include the expenditures. So that is, 310, the professional services contract, that just needs to be changed, slightly, as well as the non-operating expenditures, which is the subsidy to public authorities. There was actually 2 withdrawals because that was with the loans, and there was only one identified in the last report. So other than that, that was the only change I noticed that we needed to make. And, with these changes, we can then resubmit it to Paris.
And that's the change you have in
The
there.
original one,
I'm sorry?
how come we didn't catch it in the original?
So the reason, when we looked at the QuickBooks, it was basically where the, withdrawals were. There was actually 2 withdrawals, and our accountant did not notice that second withdrawal. So once I noticed it, once it came to my attention, that's when I identified it and we had to rectify it.
What was the total dollar amount? Did it change?
So the original amount from the subsidies to public authorities, that was around 1.6 million. That was the revolving loan fund. But, as you recall, with IDA, they had multiple loans that moved over, and so the remainder was about 1.3 million.
So that's the 2.9 that you've got here on that line item.
Yes.
I'll say this is a good example of the checks and balances built into the system here. So when we submit information in Paris, there's a process where data's put into the report and then reviewed and approved by different people before it's submitted to the ABO office. So it's a good,
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
there's checks and balances, and there's a good example of, those in action here, and it was a good catch by Katie. And,
Yeah. Did you update the process to do this for next year so that we don't have the same problem again next year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Who actually did the final numbers first time?
It was from our accountant.
The consultant.
Yes,
So Linda Wiener's been coming in.
$65 an hour.
yes. Yes. And I think it really just goes to show the need of having a full-time fiscal officer with our organization, especially when it comes to, Paris reporting and pilot bills. Both Brian, Deb, and I, we worked really well with getting all of that together and getting it out on time and getting the payments back in, and even doing the checks earlier than we did last year. So with, I think, the collaboration of the 3 of us, it went really well. But it was, a lot of work with all 3 of us because that's not our full-time position.
It pulls us away from doing other stuff.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
But
yeah.
we're-
But, with a new business specialist and with the fiscal officer coming back on board, I think this will be a really good way to revamp our department. But these past few months in particular, especially with Paris reporting and with pilots, the fiscal officer is a really needed position in this
This is basically the busiest time of year
The
for us on
busiest time of year.
paperwork and,
in regards to the fiscal
But
officer position.
yeah.
Someone kept on calling me Jamie, and I'm like, well, that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, right, you might as well be the head square
I'm like,
today.
it has been mine. So I think this is as Brian mentioned, that's why we have the checks and balances of somebody who provides the information, and then, somebody who then inputs it and checks it off at the Paris reporting, and then that's where it was identified.
Do you feel that going forward, this is something that you would catch prior to the Paris reporting step?
So the Paris report is somewhat of an aggregation of accounts. So it's not as straightforward as just transferring our balance sheet or to the Paris report, because it pulls information from a number of different accounts. So errors happen, right? But built into the process is that checks and balances of, verifying information. So to Katie's point, I don't anticipate an issue in the future, but every now and then, an accounting error could happen because we're pulling data or information from a number of different areas to aggregate numbers to meet. So Paris doesn't give you an option to sort of submit your own balance sheet. You got to meet their criteria and pull from a number of different accounts or,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, I mean, I understand, and I do also understand that errors happen. Do you think, I guess I'll ask a different way. Would other IDAs be using the Paris process to identify errors, or is there something in place where it's perfected before entering?
no, I think this is a process every IDA is gonna follow because we don't do our accounting like Paris suggests that we do. It's just very generic at the Paris reporting level, and we're significantly more granular. So we're aggregating information from a number of different areas to report to Paris our activity. And in the process of doing that, you know, human error can enter into it. But to Katie's point about having a fiscal officer and someone here full time, I think would really, you know, that person whose eyes are on this information on a daily basis would correct some of these reporting errors in the beginning.
Yeah, understood. Thank you.
Dave,
Okay, anything else on that
did
one?
we?
So back to the
We need a resolution.
motion. Yeah, there is a resolution on this.
I make a motion, we approve the.
Okay, motion to
Second,
accept.
Jamie and Pam. Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Number 5.
Sure. So this resolution is authorizing assignment of ownership for a solar project. This kind of happens fairly regularly with solar projects. So there's developers and in turn typically transfer ownership of solar projects after they're constructed to financiers. This is an effort to get a little ahead of the game. So we have previously approved a project with New York Williamson One LLC, who intends to transfer ownership to Generate Capital, which will be the long-term asset holder. So this is an attempt to get board approval of said transfer prior to finalization of documents, so that our closing book is reflective of the long-term asset owner. Our contracts are with long-term asset owners, right? We have an agreement with whoever owns stuff. But that ownership transfer typically happens after closing of our IDA pilot documents. So this resolution here is to authorize said future transfer to Generate Capital after the project closes.
How old is this project?
So this was approved in August of this year.
Not yet closed,
Right.
but not yet closed, right?
Not yet closed, and they're already transferring it to Generate Capital.
They have a plan to transfer after closing. And this is where it's, frankly, this whole solar project development process is different than our typical pilot process. So a developer, you know, New York Williamson One LLC is a typical real estate LLC, right? It's a project being developed by a solar company. So the solar company gets everything in place, site plan approval, you know, seek environmentals, IDA project agreements, all the financial stuff in place. So then
And then they can sell it to a paper pusher.
you got it, right? You know, asset owners are taking advantage of tax credits and other depreciation and all that other stuff. So it happens, but when we close with that owner.
Right.
And then after the fact, at sale, sometimes, and this has happened where project owners transfer ownership without notifying the IDA, which is a requirement within our contracts. So then things get a little funky for a little while where, oh, wait, hold on, or we issue a bill and they're like, well, we sold this to, it should go over here. You're supposed to notify us, read the contract agreements, you know what you're doing. So in an effort to get a little ahead of the game here on this one.
And it's 100% assignment, like we've talked about bonds at this table before, and
Yes,
it's gonna happen in 15 or 20 years.
It is.
It's 100%.
Correct.
So
paper pushers are really probably investors, right?
Yes, large investment firms who are interested in buying
But I'm
assets.
seeing this a lot in the, reading about it in the paper, where there's large investment, portfolios are interested in a lot of different things.
In particular, solar. They're, like I said, those assets provide lots of tax benefits.
Yes.
So investment firms they set aside large chunks of money and say, hey, developers, bring us developed and completed projects. The trigger, though, and the issue, if you will, is that transfer of ownership. So these guys know who their long-term asset owner would be, but that asset owner says, I want the fully baked deal done and signed, and then we'll take it.
Do you know what the profit is for the developer? Will you ever know that number?
No, we wouldn't, no. I'll say anecdotally, we're told that profit margins are thin on solar projects. And this is what, I might even talk a little bit about some of this stuff. I will, I guess, but, there's a lot of effort to standardize certain parts of this process. This is where conversations related to pilots come in, and the cost or value of said pilot related to the profit margin. So some solar developers push back, and they say, I can't afford your pilot payment because I need to make a profit and provide a project that provides long-term returns to that long-term asset owner with power purchase agreements and 20-year power purchase agreements or longer in some cases. This is a long-look deal, not to mention accelerated depreciation and all the other things that could go into ownership and long-term asset ownership of solar projects. So it gets a little complicated, not terribly complicated. I mean, you can understand the benefits here.
The cost of power is gonna go up.
It's a little bit of reading the tea leaves. How much, where, the different load zones, New York ISO, again, the terms and details of power purchase agreements, lots of nuances, not to mention the state and federal incentive programs continuously change. NYSERDA, New York Siting Board now, which is somewhat new in New York, is, they manage what's called the VDER, VDER. It's an acronym. Don't ask me what it stands for, but that's how they provide state-level benefits for solar projects, and it's nuanced. We could walk through a spreadsheet sometime if anybody wanted to, but it all comes down to, do you trust their spreadsheet? And sometimes I've looked at them, and sometimes I'm like, I don't know, and I'll get into some details about something because it'll help maybe paint a different picture on the solar side of stuff. There are some laws going into place at the beginning of next year. I'd just like very briefly to talk about with you guys. But in any case,
Brian, are they held, when the transfer happens, are they held accountable for all the commitments made for the deal that we do here?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
The reclamation, anything that is put in place, that transfer still holds 100% for whoever has it, okay?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
No way for them to get out.
No, and if they don't follow it, I mean, they would be in default, and there are legal mechanisms and lots of things in place. Like there's 20 different closing documents associated with these, and very detailed descriptions of site plans and other things, so that the game is kind of new still. It shouldn't be, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned that it's happening in the middle of the process.
This was a recommendation from our Harris Beach attorneys in order to avoid confusion moving forward.
Right, and we've noticed this with this company in the past, that they've then switched it over relatively right after we have signed all the documentation, so we're trying to get a step ahead of the game too.
I'll say, generally speaking, we don't usually push back on assignment of ownership, assuming that the general details of the project are, it's a qualified future owner. This has happened with standard pilot agreements or contracts in the past. So generally, we sort of don't see a lot of issues with asset assignment related to pilot agreements. But we need to know who owns the project. you know?
Right.
So
Right.
this is an
And who
attempt
was-
to,
Right.
right, who's responsible for the pilot payments? Who's responsible for adhering to all the agreements related to our project and our approval of incentives and
Mhm.
benefits?
So I guess that, then the only question I would have is, with the new company that we know, is there anything that we would have asked for, from them if it would have been in their name from the beginning? That we do not have?
No,
No, we do ask that in the application as well.
but is there anything we would have?
Yeah.
Yeah, we,
Yeah, so we do ask that in the application of, you know, because sometimes it might be for example, the pilot we had here today, you know, his company name is actually from a different company, but it's the 4614 Dean Parkway, or 63 Dean Parkway. So we have that identified in the application, but, you know, we talk about who the applicant is, but then also who's gonna be the user and the ultimate.
not to mention, we know who owns what,
Yes,
right? So
Okay.
it's that, we don't say, you know, company LLC, it's who are the owners of the said LLC,
right.
and percentages of ownership and things like that are all part of our process.
Yeah.
Bottom line is, when a change like this happens, none of the terms change.
Correct.
That's what I am.
But
Yeah.
I guess really what and this is absolutely standard in the solar project development process. Very few developers end up long-term asset owners of solar projects. They're almost always looking for an outtake, someone to, you know, buy them out and.
No renegotiating, it's just title transfer.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's no changes in our deal, correct.
Yep.
Other questions? Motion to accept the resolution?
I'll move it.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
And then, you probably know this, but for the record, the voting parties underneath that resolution and what was sent to us in advance have incorrect board members listed.
We caught it.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, and then our last item is our account balances. As you've noticed, our IDA checking account is larger than normal, and a majority of that will be because of the pilot payments, but we, have those checks. They have been signed, and we will be sending them out, within the next day or so, so that.
Get them out.
Yes, I know.
Right.
Yeah,
It's
well,
good.
and we're earlier than last year, so that's good. So we're a step ahead of the game, and that's one of the things we've been working on, is
I can
making
save
sure we
you
get them
stamps,
out.
just give me mine now.
Yeah, well, she's been calling. I know her very well. She's very pleasant, very nice, so, and we talked on Monday, and I said, I'm getting the signatures, and I'll send it to you.
Well, it affects our budgeting, that's the.
Yes, no, and I gave her the amounts too.
Yeah,
So she's like, okay, all right. I go Wednesday, maybe Thursday, we have the pitch competition, so we have to work on that.
Yeah.
She's been very nice. So, yeah, those will be going out, but they are earlier than last year, so we're definitely
It's good.
improving our status with, getting those checks out.
Is that all we have for the IDA?
That's all we have. Any other business you wanna?
I'll just walk through a few things, just 'cause these are coming, and so, speaking of solar, there's a new law going into effect January 1st, Real Property Tax Law 575B. This is really gonna affect taxing jurisdictions, in particular towns and assessors. So, this law required the New York State Department of the Treasury to develop a model standard assessment for solar projects. The law says that a pilot can't charge any more than the standard base value of said assessment. So, generally speaking, I don't see this affecting us at all. But it will require us, because they use called discounted cash flow analysis. So effectively, the value of that solar project will decrease over time. So in year, let's say 12 of our 15-year pilot for a solar project, we'll need to verify that their pilot payment doesn't exceed the standard model assessment value of that solar project. Kind of making sense?
Yes.
A little bit? So, right, so if it's worth, assessment model says a 1 megawatt project is worth $1 million today, in year 12, it could say it's worth $300,000. We'll have to look at the tax rates, do the math on that value, and verify that their pilot payment doesn't exceed what they would be paying in taxes. Frankly, it's more work for us. I'm not thrilled about it. They use capitalization rates in their discounted cash flow model that the industry says are too low, that assessors are probably gonna say are too high. There's a lot of confusion in this at the state level. Whether or not the state can dictate to assessors what value they assign anything is another question mark. But it is going into effect as of January 1st. So we will have to monitor all of our existing and future solar projects to verify that, because our pilot schedule goes up, right? We have a 2% escalator every year. So as their value goes down, our payments go up, and if they meet, we have to account for that in our billing of that pilot. I don't see it happening. I have to look through the math a little more. Again, I expect the last few years of our pilot, it might come into play, but given the overall discount of what they're paying for a pilot payment and what they would be paying in taxes, comparatively speaking, I think we'll be fine through the full 15 years.
Just gonna be applied to any new programs, or do we have to look at anybody who's approaching that year 12 and do the analysis now?
All solar projects. Yeah, so as the assessor evaluates that's another thing, by the way, at the local level, assessors will have to revalue solar projects every year based on the assessment model, applying, equalization rates. So it's more work at the local level, significantly more work at the local level. This is the state's attempt to standardize these things and meet the state's renewable energy goals.
Yeah, surprising, because it doesn't sound like they get a whole lot out of it. The state.
They get whatever, 70-80% renewable energy by 2030 or whatever the number is, at least that's their
Money-wise, they don't. Money-wise, they're generating a lot of revenue because of it.
Correct, yeah, the state's not generating any real revenue from solar projects,
Not typical for the state.
nicer to, go ahead,
It
Deb.
sounds like what you're talking about is depreciation. Like, for instance, if you built a building, it's a permanent installation, you would depreciate that over 30 years. Now you're trying to determine how to depreciate something over 15, because that's the length of your pilot. So,
Yep.
It just sounds like it's an accounting thing, and it's beneficial
It's
to have it all mapped out, because everybody should be doing the same thing.
Comes down to like things in terms like time value of money, future net present value. There's lots of real estate developers use discounted cash flow analysis in evaluating the future cash flows of real estate projects, think big apartment buildings or, commercial buildings. It's an accounting method to evaluate investments and the value of investments over time. And solar developers say the value of my investment in a solar project goes down over time. And our typical assessment of property doesn't necessarily account for that, right? We don't depreciate in the assessment model houses, right? The accounting method would 27 and a half years, I think, if I'm pulling the right number out of my head, is the depreciation value of a house. But if a house has been around 27 years, we don't say it's worth nothing. At the assessment rolls, it's probably worth a lot more, assuming there's some reinvestment and things like that. But anyways, it's very interesting, I think, if you like math and you're into this stuff. But
Well, when you're talking about high land values, oftentimes taking the improvement off the land is a escalation in value, not less but more. So
yeah,
especially when you're downstate, the land values are much higher than they are upstate.
these are based on improvements, right? So I'll say
Right.
the underlying land value of those investments should not be affected by this pilot, but it will come into play in the full valuation, I think, and that's another nuanced question that I haven't yet answered. So if the value of the land doubles because of whatever reason, this place is a lot more, land's worth a lot more in 10 years from now than it was in the past, how does that underlying land value impact the full assessment in the model and the pilot and all the other things that go on it? But as of January 1st, that law goes into effect. There's one other, New York State labor law goes into effect, January 1st. This one's even more complicated, and there are more questions related to this. This directly impacts IDAs and all economic development folks on the public side of things. Effectively, it's if a project exceeds $5 million in construction costs, what that is, TBD, we don't know. The law doesn't describe it. And the value of financial assistance exceeds 30%. That project is required to utilize prevailing wage. Typically, so the pilot benefits to that project go into that 30%. Guessing it's the full term of our pilot, so the full value of the 10 years worth of property tax, plus the sales tax benefits, mortgage recording tax benefits, plus any benefit received from Empire State Development or any other state agency outside of a few nuances. But how you go about doing the math and applying the formula, yesterday there was a economic development virtual conference where they were talking about, they had 4 attorneys, and there were probably a ton of IDA directors on there, and the attorneys themselves said, look, I'm a lawyer. I can't interpret this. I can't even interpret the language within the law. Not to mention there's no definitions related to certain things like what's the definition of construction cost? Does it exclude architectural and engineering and, all the other things? So it's incumbent upon the project developer to identify if they exceed those thresholds. And everyone's not really sure how this is going to play out. But it does go into effect as of the first of the year. I'm anticipating a number of projects come to us early next year, and we'll have to walk through this to whatever extent we can with assistance from our law firms and everyone else at the state level who's looking at this and asking questions like, how do we do this?
Yeah, 'cause I'm wondering if you're gonna need to hire somebody to review payrolls.
For prevailing.
Who does the onus fall on?
It's the project owner. At the end of the day, it's the project owner and the New York State Department of Labor. So they are, I forget the name, Katie, if you remember, but there is to be a board.
The Public Subsidy Board,
Thank you.
but it hasn't been formed yet.
There's no one on it.
And so the lawyers were saying that if that was in place, that the developers would be able to go to the Public Subsidy Board in order to get guidance on these sorts of questions. But because it's not in existence, that would impact legal enforceability, kind of. Like if an issue went before a judge where a developer had not, stayed within the guidelines, that they were guessing that a judge wouldn't hold them accountable because they weren't able to go to the Public Subsidy Board for guidance.
Who wants to be the guinea pig?
Yeah, right.
Who wants to take the risk or assume that
Are
who
they
knows?
working to build the board yet or not? You don't know.
We have a fairly new governor as it is. I don't know. Nobody knows, as far as I can tell.
This goes into effect January 1?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, right around the corner. They don't have a board.
Until there's a board, it won't be enforced, or
I suppose they could do anything.
I don't understand how they'll
We don't
enforce
know.
it if there's no board.
We don't know. The New York State Department of Labor can effectively put a stop work order on any project they feel is out of compliance of the law.
Yeah, right.
Whether or not they are actively enforcing that or not, who knows? There are, again, no definitions of the particular elements of this law that are gray, and, we'll see. Anyway, FYI, a couple legal moving parts here that affect the business that we do. Real quick, Ontario property sale updates. We continue to work through details with Harbeck on the sale of that 10-acre parcel to the east of their property. It's a little nuanced, but we are working to close soon. Just some outstanding questions on title and deed stuff, and verifying and making sure everything's in place, but John's been working on that. John, are you there?
Yep. Yeah, they're waiting.
Anything else on that one?
The buyer's waiting to hear back from their title company about the survey and legal description. Once they sign off on it, then we can work on getting it scheduled.
The other property is to the north of Harbeck there, that's the AP Properties, if everyone's recall, they own and manage some real estate in this is, by the way, OptiPro, and both of these projects are all in that Dean Parkway, Timothy Lane, project. Sidebar, there's a traffic study going on right now, and we've got some early engineering on getting another egress access point to that park that would open up additional acreage, but would alleviate some traffic concerns existing now and then moving forward as development continues over there. But AP, we've been going back and forth with them. The plan was to sort of sync up a pilot with their project, and just can't get our feet underneath us with the pilot, so they've decided to forego IDA benefits. They may or may not pursue 485B benefits. It's really up to them and submitting paperwork to the assessor. But if you guys are continue to be okay with this, it's a good project in my mind. Again, they own property over there. If you recall, it's their development effectively involves, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's about 15 individual rental units for various businesses. Some of which the issue was they couldn't commit to maintaining 33% or less of the retail uses within there. So it was the IDA and the pilot requirement is that no more than 33% of your property is used for retail. Just weren't ready to commit to it, not to mention a few other details and things. They just didn't come together. But in any case, I think, assuming you guys are okay with it, we'll continue to pursue disposition of that property to AP. Clear as mud? Okay. That's all I got for the IDA.
Clear as mud.
Unless there's questions for me.
If there's nothing else, motion to adjourn the IDA.
Motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And just remember, it's an early meeting next month, so because of the holidays, we bumped it up to the third week instead of the fourth week, just like we did this month, just as a friendly reminder. It comes faster than we